The beaten widow. The air in the little frontier town of Willow Creek always carried dust. It settled on porches, on boots, on the hems of skirts, as though the land itself wanted to remind everyone that nothing came easy here. Cattle, crops, even life itself, all had to be fought for. On that August afternoon, the street outside the Mercantile was quiet until the shouts began. It was a woman's cry, sharp, pained, desperate. A man cursed, followed by the thud of a heavy blow. Folks peeked from windows, some whispered from doorways, but no one stepped out. They all knew where the sound was coming from, the alley behind the Mercantile, where the Carson family had been quarreling since morning. Samuel Carter heard it too. He was a tall rancher, broad-shouldered from years of taming land that had tried to kill him more than once. He'd come into town only to pick up flour and nails, but the cry stopped him cold. He knew that kind of sound, not just pain, but hopelessness. Samuel dropped his sack of supplies on the boardwalk and strode toward the alley. There, crumpled against the wall, was a young woman, her dark hair falling loose around a pale, bruised face. Her dress was torn, arms raised to shield herself as three men loomed over her. One had just drawn back his boot for another kick. Two small girls, identical twins no older than 4, clung to their mother's skirts, screaming. And swaddled in a basket at her side was a third, an infant, crying so hard her tiny face flushed purple. The man with the boot sneered. "We told you, Ruth. Girls again. 3 of them. That's no blessing, that's a curse. You've brought shame on the Carson name." "She should have given him a son," another spat. "Your husband's dead, and all you've got to show are worthless mouths to feed. You'll pay, you hear me?" Samuel's blood boiled. He didn't hesitate. His deep voice thundered across the alley. "That's enough." The men froze. Samuel stepped forward, his shadow stretching long in the dust. The Carsons knew him. Everyone did. Samuel wasn't a man you wanted to cross, not because he was violent, but because he was unflinching, with a stare that could cut like a blade. The eldest Carson, red-faced and sweating, snarled. "This ain't your business, Carter. She's our kin, and she shamed us. You walk on." Samuel looked down at the battered widow, at her terrified girls. His jaw set like stone. "From where I stand," he said slowly, "it looks very much like my business." He reached out his hand to her. She flinched, then blinked up at him through tears. His voice softened only for her. "You're coming with me." Ruth Carson had not expected rescue. When her husband John died of fever that spring, she'd stayed with his kin because she had nowhere else to go. But grief had soured quickly into cruelty. Every day since the triplets' birth, they'd reminded her she was a burden. Today, they'd decided to beat it into her. She clutched her daughters tighter, torn between fear and the impossible pull of this stranger's voice. He wasn't asking. He was claiming, not her as property, but as someone worth defending. Her lips trembled. "But I can't." "Yes," Samuel said firmly, scooping the basket with the wailing baby into his arm. "You can. And you will." When the Carsons lunged to block him, Samuel's glare alone stopped them cold. His free hand slid to the revolver holstered at his hip. "Touch her again, and you'll answer to me." For a long, tense moment, only the baby's cries filled the alley. Then the Carsons backed off, muttering curses under their breath. Samuel guided Ruth and the twins out into the sunlight, his broad figure a shield between them and the family that had betrayed her. On the boardwalk, townsfolk watched in silence. Some looked relieved, some disapproving, but no one challenged him. Samuel Carter was not a man they would oppose. Ruth limped beside him, her daughters clutching her skirts. She whispered, Why are you doing this?" Samuel didn't look down, just kept walking toward his wagon. "Because no one else did." They rode in silence for miles, the prairie stretching wide and golden around them. The twins dozed, the infant finally quiet in Ruth's arms. She kept glancing at Samuel, torn between gratitude and fear. She didn't know him, only his reputation as the loner rancher who lived on the edge of the valley. Folks said he'd lost his wife years ago, that he worked the land alone and spoke little. Some said he carried more sorrow than he let on. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't have interfered. They'll come after us." Samuel flicked the reins, gaze steady on the horizon. "Let them try." That night, at his ranch, Ruth bathed her bruises with trembling hands while Samuel fixed beds for the girls. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. But when she emerged from the small washroom, wearing one of his late wife's old nightdresses, his eyes softened. "This house was too quiet," he said simply. "Maybe it's time that changed." Ruth's heart ached. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since her husband's death, she felt something stir inside her chest. Something like safety. Something like hope. And in the dark silence of his home, Samuel Carter promised himself one thing. No one would ever lay a hand on Ruth or her girls again. A home for the triplets. Morning light spilled across the Carter ranch, golden over the fields. For Ruth, it was the first dawn in months that hadn't filled her with dread. She awoke to the smell of coffee and biscuits, the twins curled beside her on the spare bed. The baby stirred in her arms. She kissed her daughter's soft forehead and rose carefully. In the kitchen, Samuel was already working, sleeves rolled, hair damp from the pump. He nodded when she entered. "There's coffee on the stove. And biscuits, if the girls are hungry." Ruth blinked. She hadn't expected kindness, not from a man who barely knew her. She poured a cup, murmuring, "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Samuel interrupted. He glanced at the bruises on her cheek, his jaw tightening. "What was done to you was wrong. You need rest. And your girls need a safe home." Ruth's throat tightened. No man had spoken to her that way, not even her late husband, who'd been gentle but weak, always deferring to his domineering kin. This man was different. Steady. Certain. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Ruth had never dreamed possible. Samuel worked the cattle and mended fences, but always made time to help with the girls. He lifted the twins onto his shoulders to pick apples, showed them how to feed the hens, even carved them little wooden dolls by lamplight. At night, when the baby fussed, he'd rise and walk the floor with her, murmuring low songs until she slept. Ruth watched in awe. This man who owed her nothing treated her daughters as if they were his own. One evening, as they sat on the porch while the girls played in the dirt, Ruth finally asked, "Why are you doing all this for us?" Samuel was quiet a long while. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun sank red over the hills. "My wife, Clara, died 5 years ago," he said softly. "We had a son. He didn't survive the winter after she passed. Ever since, the house has been empty. Too empty." He looked at her then, eyes raw but steady. "When I saw you in that alley, I couldn't stand by. Maybe it was God's way of saying it was time to open this place again." Ruth's breath caught. She wanted to speak, but the weight of his honesty left her silent. Instead, she reached for his hand. He let her hold it, strong and warm beneath her fingers. But peace on the frontier was fragile. The Carsons did not forget. 1 week later, Samuel spotted riders approaching from the ridge. 3 men, rifles slung across their backs. He recognized them before they were close, Ruth's in-laws, faces twisted with hate. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Ruth froze, clutching the baby to her chest as the twins hid behind her skirts. The Carsons dismounted, the eldest sneering. "You think you can steal what's ours, Carter?" That woman belongs with her husband's kin. And them girls too. Hand 'em over. Samuel's voice was calm, but it carried like iron. She doesn't belong to you. She never did. The man spat. Then you'll die for her. The standoff was tense, the wind whipping dust across the yard. Samuel raised his rifle slowly, steady as stone. Maybe. But you'll have to walk through me first. Ruth's heart pounded. For the first time, she saw what kind of man Samuel truly was. Not just a protector, but a shield. He would face down anyone, even death itself, to keep her safe. The Carsons hesitated. Samuel didn't blink. Finally, muttering curses, they turned their horses and rode off, dust trailing behind. The threat wasn't gone, but they had lost today. Ruth sagged with relief. Samuel lowered his rifle, then turned to her. His voice softened. You and your girls are mine to protect now. No one will take you from here. Her eyes filled with tears. But why, Samuel? Why fight for us so fiercely? He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her bruised cheek. Because I love you, Ruth. And because those girls deserve a father who won't ever let them down. Ruth gasped softly. The words she thought she'd never hear again settled deep in her soul. She saw truth in his eyes, not fleeting kindness, but a vow. Slowly, she whispered, Then, take us as yours. All of us. Samuel kissed her then, gentle but sure. The twins squealed in delight, not fully understanding but knowing somehow their world had changed forever. Even the baby cooed, as if blessing the union. That night, Ruth tucked her daughters into their new beds, whispering promises of safety. Then she lay beside Samuel beneath the wide, starlit sky, her heart no longer heavy with fear. For the first time since she'd buried her husband, she dreamed not of loss, but of tomorrow. And Samuel Carter, the man who had once lived in silence, finally had a family again. Together, they had turned pain into hope. And on that ranch at the edge of the prairie, a widow, a rancher, and 3 little girls built a new beginning, stronger than the dust, stronger than the cruelty of kin, stronger than anything that might come. Because sometimes all it took was one man to say, "You're coming with me."